Hey everyone, it's Mr. Drake. We are going to move on to institutions of national government. If you are one of my students, we're going to start with our unit on Congress. This video is only meant to give you a very brief overview of how Congress looks and sort of how it's evolved over the years. A lot of the intricacies of Congress, like the party structure within Congress and how a bill becomes a law and the committee system, all of that's going to be for another day. Today we're just going to look at how Congress is made up, how it compares with legislative bodies in other parts of the world, like the parliamentary system in Great Britain, for example, what the framers, the writers of the Constitution, intended Congress to look like and what they intended their role to be, and again, how Congress has sort of changed over the course of American history. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and get started. The legislative branch in the United States is set up quite differently from the parliamentary systems found in European countries. In this video, we'll use Great Britain as the primary example. In Great Britain, candidates for parliament are chosen by the party. So when people go to vote, they're really not voting so much for the candidate, they're voting for the party, Labor or Conservative or whatever minor party you may have on the ballot in a particular area. And who goes on the ballot the next time around, at the next election, will also be decided by the party. So if you're a member of parliament and you've gone against your party time and time again, they're not going to put you on the ballot the next go-around. So members of parliament have to pretty much do whatever the party higher-ups tell them to do in order to remain on the ballot and continue to represent their holding in the House of Commons in Parliament. Because of this, a lot of what Parliament does is national in scope because they're loyal to the party and not so much to the people they're representing. Also in Parliament, the head of government and the cabinet come out of the Parliament. So the current Prime Minister of Great Britain, David Cameron, he's just a member of Parliament who got elected out of a smaller district, just like every other member of the House of Commons. But he's the head of the Conservative Party, so he is the Prime Minister, and he chooses his cabinet from among other Conservative MPs as well. There are a lot of members of the House of Commons, and because they don't have a lot of interaction with their constituents and they're more loyal to the party than they are to the people they represent, they don't have as much power or influence because there's just so many of them. Now, we've talked about Congress a little bit in this class with the voting and the elections and all of that, but you already know that candidates are nominated in primaries and then will run in the general election. And the candidate is the most important thing in the election, sometimes not necessarily party affiliation. Because the party system is weaker in the U.S., congressmen are much more independent than MPs are in Great Britain, and they have to pay attention to their districts, otherwise they won't get nominated in the next primary election. So constituent services and paying attention to a district's needs are much more important matters in the U.S. Obviously, the executive branch is completely separate of the executive. The president is elected separately. It doesn't come out of the Congress or anything like that. And some individual members of Congress actually have a great deal of influence. Congressmen have staffs in upwards of 24 people sometimes that mostly take care of constituent services and things like that. Members of Congress are paid pretty well. Just your average everyday congressman, not a leader or anything like that, will make about $175,000 a year. If you're a speaker or a party leader, you'll make even more. So quite a few differences between Parliament and Congress. The framers of the Constitution were very thorough in laying out what Congress should look like and what roles it should have, which is why Article 1 of the Constitution, which deals with Congress, is so bloody long compared to the other 6. They did set up a bicameral legislature. That means there are 2 houses, the House and the Senate. This was a result of the Connecticut Compromise at the Constitutional Convention, which made one house based on proportional representation based on population, that's the House, and then made the Senate equal in terms of representation from the states, 2 senators from each state. And before the Civil War, that helped maintain balance in the Senate between the free states and the slave states. And on several occasions, states were actually admitted to the Union in the early 1800s in pairs, so as to keep that balance. You'd admit one free state and one slave state. Most notably in 1820, Maine was admitted as a free state and Missouri was admitted as a slave state as part of the Missouri Compromise. There were limits placed on Congress's power. That's why there are so many checks and balances listed in the Constitution, the things that the judicial branch and the executive branch can do to limit Congress's authority, but it is still supposed to be the dominant institution of government. Now, that has changed over the years. Congress was very, very powerful for a very long time relative to the other branches and still has a great deal of power and influence. But the presidency has strengthened over the last century or so, and you see the presidency is more of a equal with Congress in terms of the power that it actually wields. Now, how effective a body of Congress is in actually passing legislation, enacting policy, and all of that, oftentimes will depend on the strength of the leadership in that body. If you have strong leadership, they're able to sort of round up votes within the majority party to get measures passed with relative ease. If there are divisive issues out there that people can't agree on, even within the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, for example, it might be much harder to get legislation passed, and you might see much weaker leadership in Congress as a result. Because of issues that are taking place in the country, or movements, things like that, the power of the leadership in the House has sort of ebbed and flowed over the last couple of centuries. When divisive issues are present, like slavery, for example, civil rights, the leadership typically weakens because they can't get their party all on the same page to actually get something passed. During times of relative peace and prosperity, or even when there's a war going on, when everyone is supporting the war, it might be much easier to actually get things through, and you might see stronger speakers of the House and majority leaders if that is to be the case. As of right now, the leadership in the House of Representatives, the Republican Party, is fairly weak relative to other times in history because there's so many various factions within the Republican Party, most notably the Tea Party movement, which has made Speaker John Boehner's job very, very difficult. When the Democrats last controlled the House from 2007 to 2011, the Democratic leadership was pretty good at maintaining party discipline. The Republicans have had a much harder time of doing so. The strength and power of the Senate is a different story, mainly because of its size and who makes it up. There hasn't been a lot of change over the years in how the Senate operates and how powerful the leadership is and stuff, primarily because of size. It's a lot smaller. There's only 100 members as opposed to 435 members of the House. It's much more informal in the Senate. It's more collegial, I guess you could say. And you don't have the need for really restrictive rules on debate and things like that you'll find in the House. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about bills becoming laws. But this is the main reason the filibuster has sort of endured in the Senate. That's where you can debate something essentially endlessly until it's cut off. There have been a couple of major changes in the way the Senate operates over the years, and they occurred in about a 4-year span of each other in about 100 years ago. In 1913, the 17th Amendment was ratified, which made senators directly elected by the people. This was big because senators were now accountable to the citizenry of their states for the first time, and they weren't just puppets of state legislatures. In many cases, before 1913, senators were put in Washington, D.C. to pretty much do whatever the higher-ups in states wanted them to do. Also in 1917, the idea of cloture made its way into the Senate. This is when 60 senators, or 3/5 of the body, can vote to cut off a debate. So 60 votes are needed to end a filibuster, end debate on a bill, and bring it to a vote. And we'll talk more about that during the lawmaking procedures as well. So that will do it for today. Again, this is just intended to be a very basic introduction as to how Congress works, and we will go over much more of the ins and outs of how Congress operates over the course of this unit. As always, feel free to ask me if you have any questions. Cheers.